The Basketball Hall of Fame is not as hard to get into compared to other major sports, but there still are a bunch of great players, former All-Stars who played for a long time, yet they're not in the Hall of Fame. For some of these guys, I think they will get in eventually during an off year where the competition is not as tough, but still, as of this video, they are not yet in the Hall of Fame. Also, I won't be including players who are not yet eligible to make it, like Kobe or Duncan or Garnett. They aren't eligible until 2020. How's it going, fellas? My name's Andy, and without further ado, here are the 8 greatest players who are not in the Basketball Hall of Fame. But before we begin, this video is sponsored by Squarespace. Visit squarespace.com/AndyHoops to get 10% off your first purchase. Number 8's Penny Hardaway. Normally, I'd put Penny higher on a list like this because he was a legit superstar, but his prime years were very short, and by the age of 26, he regressed into a role player. The knee injuries derailed his Hall of Fame career cause if he stayed healthy, there's no question that he'd be a first ballot Hall of Famer. By the age of 26, he was already a 4-time All-Star and made 3 All-NBA teams. He was on his way to becoming an all-time great before the tragic ACL tear. And most fans would agree that Penny is one of the greatest what-ifs in NBA history. As for his Hall of Fame case, I don't know. Just from a career standpoint, he does not have the accolades or the longevity. But at the same time, Bill Walton's career also got ruined due to injuries and he's in the Hall of Fame, probably because he also led his team to the championship, which Penny was not able to do. Number 7, Tim Hardaway. The father of Tim Hardaway Jr., Hardaway was one of the most athletic, explosive point guards ever. He was credited for his signature killer crossover, which was a move that defined his entire career. In the 1990s, we rarely ever saw score-first point guards who played like Hardaway. He was like the precursor to Allen Iverson, except he also had multiple seasons of averaging over 10 assists per game. Unfortunately, a devastating knee injury cut his prime short, although he did bounce back pretty well by the time he joined the Miami Heat. By the end of his career, he was a 5-time All-Star and made 5 All-NBA teams, which was quite impressive considering he played in the same era as Michael Jordan. However, he's still not in the Hall of Fame, the only member of the famous Run TMC trio who's not in there. He's made it known that he's a bit upset about it, saying that, "I thought I was going to get the call, that I was going to go in with Mitch Richmond and Alonzo Mourning. At that particular time, it was disappointing. Right now, I can't get caught up, I can't get my hopes up too high, just wait until it happens." Number 6, Larry Faust. Now, I know most people have never even heard of Larry Faust. That's because he played during the 1950s and he was never a superstar. I'm not gonna pretend I've watched him play because I didn't, and looking at his stats, they're great but not that impressive, especially for that era. However, Larry Faust has the honorary distinction of having the most All-Star selections out of any other player who's not in the Hall of Fame. 8 All-Star selections, that's a lot. Every other player who's made the All-Star team at least 8 times are in the Hall. He also died pretty early in 1984 at the age of 56 from a heart attack. So being dead for over 30 years definitely does not help his case, so I don't think Faust will ever get into the Hall of Fame. But because he holds that infamous record, I feel like he deserves to be on this list. Number 5, Jack Sikma. From 1979 to 1985, Jack Sikma made 7 consecutive All-Star games. During that stretch, he averaged about 18 points and 11 rebounds a game while also winning the championship in 1979, as arguably the team's second-best player. Unfortunately, Sikma would never make a single All-NBA team, which hurt his chances of getting into the Hall. But he's only one of 12 players who finished his career with at least 17,000 points and 10,000 rebounds. And all the other players are in the Hall of Fame or they're going to be. Sikma is a legend in Seattle, one of their best players in franchise history, but he's been waiting for almost 30 years. Honestly, I don't know how likely it is for Sikma to get in because unlike other players on this list, nobody's really pushing for him to get nominated. He's also not exactly a household name, most people nowadays have never even heard of him. But he was a great center, the most underrated big man of the 80s. Number 4, Tom Chambers. Chambers played the majority of his career in the 1980s, and he was an incredibly versatile power forward. He could score in the post, he had a nice mid-range shot, and he could pass as well as anybody else at that position. He had a couple seasons in Seattle and Phoenix where he played exceptionally well and made some deep playoff runs. Statistically, his best season was in 1989-90, where he averaged over 27 points a game and made second-team All-NBA. Overall, his resume only consists of 4 All-Star selections and 2 All-NBA selections. But also, out of every other eligible player, Chambers is only one of 2 players who scored over 20,000 points in his NBA career, and not in the Hall of Fame. The other one being Antoine Jamison. Looking at the rest of the points leaderboard, Joe Johnson is another player who scored over 20,000 and he might not get in either, and he was a 7-time All-Star. Number 3, Chris Webber. I've made a whole separate video a while ago on why I believe Chris Webber is not in the Hall of Fame. Statistically and looking at his overall resume, 5-time All-Star, 5-time All-NBA, Rookie of the Year, and he was the best player on those iconic Sacramento Kings teams. At his peak, he was arguably a top 3 power forward in the league, and around a top 10 player. He's also a very recent player, everyone knows him and knows how good he was. Even Shaq, one of his contemporaries, said that it's a travesty that C-Webb is not in the Hall of Fame. However, Webber has been surrounded by some controversy throughout his career, mainly the Ed Martin scandal, which was the biggest college basketball scandal in history. C-Webb was the main player involved in it, and he testified multiple times and was caught lying to the grand jury. As a result, his college career, along with Michigan's Fab 5 accomplishments, were wiped out of the history books. Now, I'm not saying this is the reason why he's not in fact, it could have nothing to do with it. But I think for the voters, it's definitely something that comes into play. I mean, it is the Basketball Hall of Fame, and C-Webb was involved in the most infamous scandal in the history of college basketball. So, I don't know, Webber will certainly get in eventually, we just don't know when, and these next few classes are pretty competitive. Number 2, Sidney Moncrief. Sid the Squid, one of the most underrated defenders of all time. In fact, he's the reason why the NBA made the Defensive Player of the Year award. Moncrief would win Defensive Player of the Year for the first 2 seasons the award was given out, and he had a huge impact on the perception of perimeter defense. Usually, people always thought that big men should be the ones responsible for stopping opponents at the rim. But Moncrief showed the value of playing hard-nosed, aggressive defense on the perimeter as a smaller 6'3" guard, and he played defense without gambling for steals. By the end of his career, he was a 5-time All-Star, 5-time All-NBA, 5-time All-Defense, and a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. In his prime, he averaged about 21, 6, and 5 on elite efficiency, especially during his era. As for the Hall of Fame, Sidney was very close to making it. He was a finalist for multiple years but barely missed the cut. A huge part of his snub was probably because he played in Milwaukee for most of his career. Even though the Bucks during the 80s were legit contenders going head-to-head against Philly and Boston, they were never a flashy team and they never reached the finals during the Moncrief era. In addition to Milwaukee being a small market that didn't have many fans outside of Wisconsin, that resulted in Moncrief and all those great teams being forgotten. And number 1, Ben Wallace. After missing the cut for 2 years in a row, Big Ben has to get in eventually. 4-time All-Star, 6-time All-Defense, 4-time Defensive Player of the Year, 5-time All-NBA, and the 2004 champion. His resume is way more impressive than most players who are actually in the Hall of Fame, but I guess these recent years have been tough when it came to competition. In addition to all this, Wallace is also the greatest undrafted player in NBA history. Part of the reason has to be because the NBA views defensive players differently, and for a guy like Ben, who never put up insane scoring numbers, he doesn't get the same respect. Even Dennis Rodman had to wait 11 years until he got in. I can't see it taking that long for Ben to get in, but hey, you never know with these voters. And looking at the landscape of the future Hall of Fame classes, it's gonna get harder and harder to get in. Wallace has talked about his Hall of Fame nominations before, and he said that it's not something he thinks about. But going down his list of accolades, he said he definitely qualifies. And that's all, folks. Those are the 8 greatest players who are eligible to make the Hall of Fame but are still not in. Some of these players saw their careers get cut short due to injuries, and other players played in a small market and did not get the same recognition. But I do believe that the majority of my list will get into the Hall eventually. Once again, I'd like to give a shout out to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. If you want to build your own website, Squarespace makes everything so easy, and you don't need any programming knowledge at all. They got a bunch of cool templates to choose from, so you can choose from a wide selection depending on what your website is about. Additionally, they also have marketing tools to promote your website and reach out to users with announcements or updates so you can keep in touch with all your fans. If you want to set up your own sports website or blog, you can do that. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/AndyHoops to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts on this list and which players I might have left out. Let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.